It started in the garage, probably about 40 feet or so from my truck, and he was about 50 feet further from me, heading my way at a pretty good clip. I mean, he wasn't just like meandering or anything like that. He was heading straight at me. Like when you can tell somebody's walking towards you, that's what this guy was doing. And nobody else was around.
Hey gang, if you're listening to this right now, odds are you watch videos on the main channel and you've seen how important speed and accuracy are in a gunfight. That's why Active Self-Protection recommends the Range Tech Shot Timer. I'll tell you, it's the lowest cost shot timer on the market that we're aware of, Bluetooth compatible with any Android or iOS device. More features than any other shot timer. You can store all your data on the cloud for free. That's free. Native integration with Practice Score and a visual light-based go signal. Visit them at rangetechtimer.com, rangetechtimer.com, and tell them your friends at the Active Self-Protection Podcast sent you. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am once again your host, Mike Williver, and I remain your favorite former Fed. With us today, a new friend of mine, Jeff. Jeff is from Indianapolis. He and I met at the NRA annual meeting not that long ago. Seems like a nice guy. He told me there's a story he needs to tell. He needs to tell the world. Happened to him on his way to work. Jeff is a retired soldier. He was active duty in the United States Army for 16 years, ended his career in the National Guard, and he is now an asset manager for the state of Indiana. Jeff, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for walking up to me. That was one of the reasons that I went to the NRA annual meeting this year. It was my first time. Was John and Neil and Steph figured there might be some people there who have a story to tell, and sure enough, there were several, and you are one of them, and the first one from that meeting to come on the show. So thank you for that. So tell us, outside of the Army, what sort of self-defense history do you have? Were you a firearms owner, carrier, jiu-jitsu, martial arts, anything like that?
Yeah, I've owned guns since pretty much the age of 20. I've been in the Army, like I mentioned, and a lot of work with the weapons. I was an infantry soldier before, so I got a lot of weapons training there. And then when I became an officer, I was an armor officer for the first 4 years I was there, and then switched to MI. So I had a lot of experience with different types of weapons, and going from the 120 millimeter down to the 9 millimeter Beretta, and all the fun that's in between.
Yeah, we don't recommend the 120 millimeter for everyday carry, folks, just for the record. It's a little unwieldy. So you mentioned MI. I assume that stands for military intelligence. And if you tell us any more, do you have to kill me and everyone who's listening?
No. I worked in northern England at a base called Menwith Hill. And it's just to be safe, I won't go any further than that. If
Sure.
You want to look it up, you can. But yeah, it was a very eye-opening event working there, seeing what's possible and what we do as well with our allies.
So you shared a little story with us pre-interview about your lovely wife and the circumstances around your rather sudden wedding. I think that's probably of interest, if you don't mind telling the listeners about that. You were planning on getting married, but something made you bump that up and do it a lot faster. What was that?
Yeah, it was 9/11. I was on the Deployment Ready Brigade in 1st Cavalry Division at the time, and the day that it happened, I just gotten off of PT, and I was getting ready to go back into work, and all of a sudden my wife tells me, hey, something happened in New York, come check it out. I saw the second plane hit the towers, and I grabbed my deployment bag, and we had worked in the battalion, we had worked at this. If there's an emergency, I was like, this is definitely an emergency. So I handed my wife, my girlfriend at the time, my checkbook, power of attorney. I grabbed my go bag and I said, I will call you when I can. It could be days. And she's like, okay, good luck. Not be careful, but good luck.
Yeah. And so you had been planning on, you were engaged, you were planning on getting married anyway.
Yeah, we were engaged.
You had to move that up.
And we wound up not deploying, but we wound up securing the base and told that we could deploy again. So around about December, we got married on the winter solstice, really. And just to make sure that everything was legal, just in case we did deploy. So
tell the folks, what do you mean when you say so everything's legal? I know what you mean. Maybe the listeners don't know what you mean.
so we were actually husband and wife.
Right. So if something happened to you, for example, God forbid.
Correct. Yes, it was. She was my wife, not my girlfriend, not my fiance, but she was my wife. So.
Right. I got you. A rather grim thing. There's a lot of stuff about the military that the average person probably doesn't know. I don't know how many people in the country know someone in the military. I know a ton of people. I grew up in a Navy household, and then I was a federal agent. And I grew up around DC, so obviously, and then I was in San Diego for 22 or so years as a federal agent. So probably you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting a sailor or a Marine. And the occasional Army and Air Force. Space Force wasn't a thing back then, but a ton of military people. And one of those things is like when you're going into a combat role, like writing a letter to the people you love, and in the event you don't make it back, and filling out a will, that sort of thing. That they don't show that in the recruitment video for any of the branches of service, but it's a real thing. So on behalf of my audience, I want to thank you for your service. I really do appreciate it, and I mean that. And I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam era as a kid and seeing those.
Wait a minute, I'm not that old.
Yeah, no, I do. I remember. I remember. I'm 51. I'm just old enough to remember that disgrace of a time when the people that went and did what we asked them to do were terribly disrespected and literally spit on and assaulted and called baby killers. So may we never go back to that.
Yeah. My father went through all that, and he never one of the things about my father, I knew he was in Vietnam. He was in the Air Force, but I never heard any of his stories until after I joined the military. And I asked him that, and he's like, well, you just wouldn't understand, but now you do.
Right.
Now you understand what this all meant. And I there was like a period of like 2 years he would call me, it's like, hey, I just remembered this story and this one's for you. And it was kind of a thing we had between us because, we both wore a uniform, things like, he told the nurse one time, because they were on the other side of the world in the Philippines, that you salute with your left hand.
Okay.
And her next stop was the base commander.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, that's great.
So he lost rank on that, but that was probably his best story of his life.
But was it worth it? That's the question, and I think it probably was.
He totally worth it. He said
100%. So, for purposes of the story you're going to tell us, excuse me, are you a CCW holder in the state of Indiana? Can you tell us about the laws there? What do you need to be? Is there a permit process, or is it constitutional carry? What goes on in Indiana as far as that goes?
Well, right now, back to you. Indiana is a constitutional carry state, and I am an instructor. I'm an NRA instructor. Have been for about a decade now. I didn't do a whole lot of classes as far as teaching, mostly for the National Guard, because you have to get trained as a National Guard soldier to carry in the state of Indiana. Mm-hmm. So most of my clientele would be my friends that are in the National Guard who had to but get their training done. And then I joined a retail establishment, and that's when I did a lot of teaching, and I really loved it. I loved dealing with the people and dispelling all of the bunk, as you think about.
Yeah.
And it was funny because, I would always limit myself to like, okay, well, telling people the bad things you see every month. Then I had to limit myself to the bad things that I would see every 2 weeks. And eventually got it down to about a week. And it's just, because I worked at an active gun range, and just the things, the need for people to be trained.
Yeah.
It was very rewarding, and it was very scary. And I wound up wearing body armor the whole time I was there. But
yeah, public ranges scare the crap out of me.
Yes.
And it doesn't, here in Arizona, there's plenty of like BLM land where you can go out and shoot. But if there's other people, I'm just so weary anymore, because it's not their fault. They don't know what they don't know. They don't understand. No one's taught them the rules of gun safety. They just think,
right.
I just get a gun, I go out and I shoot in some direction. It's people shooting with no berm behind what they're shooting at, and just in different directions. And it's like as John would say, it's like a Taliban quinceanera sometimes. So I try to find a place to shoot, me and my son, or with John, where it's safe and we can be not around too many members of what Ron White would call the public. So
Yeah.
your story happened on your way to work one day. So you work not in the Capitol building, but thereabouts in that sort of annex of buildings, and you were on your way to work. Kind of walk us through what time of day it was, what you saw, and what happened.
Okay, so I get to work a little bit before 7 in the morning, and I, usually at my desk at 7. In that time frame between 6:45 to 7, I'm usually at the parking garage, parking my truck inside, and then walking into the annex where I work. And it was just another day until I started noticing this guy. He just had this glare and it was at me. I had no idea what he wanted. He didn't say anything to me, but to me, it just didn't seem right. Something like, I don't know what it was, but I just got this feeling like, Jeff, this ain't right. It's, it's time to start doing what you've been practicing.
So this guy, where is this happens in the garage or between the garage and your building?
Yeah, in the garage. It started in the garage, probably about 40 feet or so from my truck. And he was about 50 feet further from me, heading my way at a pretty good clip. I mean, he wasn't just like meandering or anything like that. He was heading straight at me. Like when you can tell somebody's walking towards you, that's what this guy was doing. And nobody else was around.
With a purpose, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah,
you don't know what that purpose is.
Yeah.
Describe this guy for us. Is he an older guy, younger guy? Does he look homeless or crazy or what?
He definitely looked homeless. He was a very, very, very slight man. I would call him a meth head, or because I did call him a meth head. But about 5'7", 5'8". He had a green hoodie on, very baggy pants. I didn't look at the shoes. But he just had that, the big thing I remember is that glare that he had, the hungry, his eyes looked a little sunken back and that kind of thing. And he looked like he was I didn't know what he wanted. That's, what he was up to, but he didn't get the chance to ask me for money or try to take my car or my wallet or whatever.
So was there anything in his hands? Could you tell?
No, he had his right hand, which I'm going to guess was his dominant hand because, the percentages say that.
Sure.
Was actually in his front hoodie pocket. His other hand was just at this side.
Okay.
So I don't know. He never pulled anything out, but yeah.
So he's walking toward you. Said he never got a chance to ask you for anything. So he's walking towards you. What do you do?
Well, I instantly, once I decide that he's doing something that's not out of the normal, or that is out of the normal, sorry. I take a couple steps back, kind of widen my stance, pull my knife out, drop it at my right hand, or drop it on my right hand, and let him know that I got it out and I'm ready to go. That kind of thing. So it's not like, that's what it was. I mean, I was like, it's not you're not coming up to me to do anything that I ain't ready for is kind of the stance I took.
Okay.
So a ready stance is what you'd call it, maybe.
So I'm sure the audience is screaming into their smartphones and tablets, why were you carrying a firearm? I assume that's because you're going to work at a state building.
Yes. Yeah, it's you can have a firearm in your vehicle. It's a state complex or a state parking garage run by the state. So I can't carry from there across to the actual building and keep it in there. But yeah, I'm taking steps to fix that part right now.
So the problem I have with those sorts of policies is, at the very least, they should offer you a gun locker at the front door at security or somewhere to stow it.
Yes.
With a key that only you have, because obviously leaving it in your car, even in a safe, if someone sees you putting that away, they've got all day while you're at work. They know you're at work. There's no other reason to be parked there. They got all day to get in there and get to work on that safe to get it removed. I mean, there was a federal agent, I won't say what agency, in San Diego who had his entire, we call them G-Rides, his undercover police car, stolen while he was at official business at an event. And he was a member of that agency's SWAT team. So these knuckleheads got like an M4 sniper rifle, all this stuff. He's on call, so he has to have this stuff with him, so that's just that it is what it is. Now it's all in lock boxes that are hard mounted to the frame of the vehicle, but tweakers are going to tweak, and they staked this place out, stole his vehicle, and fortunately they found them out in the countryside, getting after it with blowtorches and all sorts of sawing equipment, trying to get into it. They didn't get into it, but if they had, could have been a very bad day. There was all flashbangs, you name it, in there.
Yeah.
So we don't encourage leaving a gun in your vehicle if it's at all avoidable. I know sometimes it's not. I would highly recommend, if you're going to do that, find a way. I mean, first of all, why are we handling guns unnecessarily in public, right? I mean, if that can be avoided, it should be avoided. But if you have to, I recommend finding an isolated spot near where you're going to be, not at the place you're going. So stop, 2 minutes before and find an isolated place to put your gun in a locker or whatever. Take a couple drives around the block to make sure no one's watching you, and then go park, because it could be a crime of opportunity. Now, let's say this was different and you were walking in there and didn't see this guy. He's eyeballing you out of the darkness and sees you get out, draw a firearm out, put it in a safe, and knows you're going to work for 8 hours. That's a bad day. He's almost certainly going to try to get in there and get to it. So,
and I've had relatives actually lose multiple firearms, so multiple different times, that would keep a firearm either in their console, their glove box, or whatever, and they've wound up just going away, and whoever's got it now has got it now.
And it's not just private citizens. Cops get guns stolen out of their cars all the time. It's, I don't know how widely reported it is, but most times that guns are misappropriated or lost or whatever, it's out of a vehicle. There's always the one guy who uses a public restroom and hangs it by the trigger guard, the hook in the back of the door, and forgets it's there. That happens, or leaves it in the lavatory of an airliner.
That happened to me. I actually discovered my bosses. It was my fourth day at work. This is at a different facility. And I found a mini Springfield on the toilet paper dispenser. And it turns out that it was not my direct supervisor, but my next level supervisor, who should have known better. But his only excuse was, I was taking a crap.
Yeah, it can happen. The only thing I ever forgotten in a bathroom stall was my phone, and that was terrifying. I can't imagine the realization that you've walked away from a loaded firearm. Cannot be a good feeling. So, and
I was more surprised that he was just so nonchalant about it.
Oh, once it was found, he was just like, "Oh yeah, thanks. I forgot that." Yeah, that's unfortunate. So this guy's coming towards you. You decide to draw a knife. Was it a fixed blade or a folding knife?
It was a folding Spyderco with a half serrated, half straight blade.
You hold it down to your side. Do you say anything, or do you just look at him and he decides not today?
I didn't say anything to him, but the eye to eye contact was there, and I'm sure he knew that it wasn't my turn to be a victim.
Right.
I made sure that I kept going as much as I could without letting him any closer to me. Basically, I tried to keep a distance, and then once I was able to, there's a small hallway that you have to go through where the office is to where I have to go to work, and of course nobody was in the office at that time. But so he kept coming, and I as I would go through the parking structure, I would stop at certain places and just stand there, and I'm like 5 or 6 car lengths away at this point, and he's on the other side almost of the parking structure, and I'm staring at him. I kind of put my knife away, like just so I didn't scare anybody else.
Right.
But I was just staring at him, and he just kept coming. I mean, he would stop after the hallway and then just kind of meander left and right kind of thing. And I'm just like, okay, he knows that I'm watching him. And I did it another time. I got through the parking structure, got across the street to where I was going to work, literally steps from the security door. And he follows me out. He's at the outer door for the parking structure in public. I'm across the street staring at him, and he does the same thing. He looks at me, kind of meanders around, but he's still looking at me. And then he finally goes off around the corner of the building, to do whatever he does. And by that time, I just kind of I took my time and went into the building and then reported it as best I could at the time.
So let's talk about other options. So if you're out in public and something like this goes down and the other person doesn't appear to be armed, or at least you can't say for sure they're armed, I'm a huge fan of OC spray for this reason. Because your liability is 1,000 times less if you have to spray someone. If you spray someone in error, who it turns out wasn't trying to hurt you or rob you, you're looking at a very, very, maybe very mild assault charge or a very mild lawsuit, which sucks. But if you have to stab someone, first of all, it's messy, it's ugly, and it's very personal, very personal. And we try to avoid it, obviously. But that's what you had on you at the time. It's you used. The people say, "What's the best gun for a gunfight?" Well, the one you have with you, the one you have on you, is the most important part. Is having it with you. You couldn't have your gun for reasons we already went over. So that's the next best thing. But people listening, I'm not saying don't carry a knife. I'm saying do carry pepper spray for this exact sort of thing. Now, it may not have dissuaded him as much as a knife did, but it's something that you would be I think a lot more readily willing to use than a knife if it came down to it. That's just the average person. Not talking about you necessarily, Jeff.
Oh yeah, no. Honestly, it wouldn't have been me. Maybe as recently as 3 months ago, and that's what I said in the original email. I owe you guys debt of gratitude because, you in some of your videos you're talking about your open hand skills and knowing how to defend yourself. And for the longest time, since I left the Army, I just got complacent. And I kind of broke out of that, thinking about what's going on in the world today. And, seeing all the riots as close to my house as downtown Indianapolis, kind of, it's like, oh, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I signed up for. So, getting out of that funk, and making sure, not only did I have a knife or I had some way to defend myself, but I knew how to do it. Again, right. The instructor in me, going through and saying that, hey, these guys, going back to the people that I know didn't know how to use a gun, and I didn't know how to use a knife. I knew what the knives can do because, I've been trained from the military with it, but have I ever used it to actually stab something? Well, yeah, a couple times, but more recently now. And this was, like I was getting some Krav Maga training in my local hometown, and they were talking about using knives and getting into the stance that I used. And, I basically, I turned him back, and my brother, I told my brother about it, and he was like, dude, he picked the wrong guy.
So do you feel like, before we talk about what happened afterwards, do you feel like had you not had that and had you not postured the way you did, that he would have tried to assault you, rob you, whatever? Did you get a definite feeling about that?
I can't say for sure, but the feeling that I've never had before. I've never had, being in, I've been literally around the world for the Army, not as a military intelligence officer. And I've never had problems being accosted or anything like that. But this was different. This woke me up, more than a pot of coffee. I was just, adrenaline instantly dropped, and I was just like, what's going on? Okay, right. Let's get ready to go. That kind of thing. And it's,
Yeah, I know that there are always second guessers. You say words on the internet and people say words back. That's what I like to say to John about the comment section of some of our videos. And so there'll be people like, well, wait a minute, he wasn't, you couldn't tell he was armed and you pulled a knife, and aren't you really the aggressor? Well, you weren't there. And if you were there, you would get that palpable sense of the Jeff got of what was going on and potentially about to happen. So I will leave.
Those armchair rangers, they got a lot to say, but they got no way to prove it.
Yeah. So with that said, you weren't sure if the knife had its intended effect, but it certainly didn't hurt for you to at least acknowledge him, like, hey, I see you. You're not sneaking up on me, for sure. That's a huge one. I'm even a fan of shouting like, "Hey, how you doing?" After someone, just like I see you, I see that you're there, I see that you're walking towards me. Frequently, that's
Yeah.
all it takes. So now you get inside finally, and
Maybe next time.
yeah, you get inside finally, and I assume there's security or Capitol Police or someone that you spoke to about this. And what happened then, or am I wrong?
Yeah, well, they were on. Apparently, there were only two of them that I when I looked on the website, and they were on vacation.
What?
So there were. I actually, after calling and I went up to the actual front security location and asked them, like, "Hey, where's the Capitol Police hangout? I had something happen in the parking lot." "Oh, well, they're not here. They're shorthanded, and they don't normally get in, till 9 anyways." And okay,
Wow, that's shocking.
sure. And then I actually sent a report to the chief, who was he was on vacation, and the one other guy that was an officer, I was told, it was on vacation. Um, it wound up the actual incident got reported. It was kind of like just an HR employee survey that happened the next month, and I said, "Hey, I had this incident happen. I took care of it myself, but I've talked to everybody in my office. They say this is not a lone incident.
Hmm.
We've had like homeless people on the escalators, just sitting down, chilling, and it requires somebody to get them out. And it's just amazing to me that is the case, or was the case. I'm assuming, hopefully they're fixing it, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, you would certainly hope they'd at least have security guards or somebody on site. But okay, right. Interesting. So, yeah. Did you get any sort of response from the chief or anyone with Capitol Police or security about that? Did they get back to you and go, "Sorry, that happened. Here's what we're doing"? Anything?
Nope, had absolutely nothing. The email never got answered. Like I said, the HR lady that I spoke to with the employee survey, I did get answers, and the typical response: "We're taking necessary steps to protect all of our employees, both inside the building and out," kind of thing. And I'm like, "No, you're not."
I take it from your.
It's just like.
No, I take it from your mocking tone that's you don't believe a word of that.
Oh no, I'm a very cynical person. My wife was actually accosted in a big box store parking lot with the security cameras at rocking the 320p with there's pixels, and
yes,
it's she literally was dragged with a child in her hand. She by her purse. That's what the guy was going for.
Right.
And the only thing we got back out of it was her driver's license they found in a mailbox over on the eastern side. We live on the west side. It was on the eastern side of town.
Yeah, we talk about transitional spaces a lot on the main channel, and that's exactly where she was when that went down. Maybe she should be on the show. So with all that said, was there anything about this story that you wanted to reiterate or tell that we haven't talked about already?
Not really. Just for the people listening, I would say, and as an instructor, I would say this in my classes: if you're ready to do the training, do the time, do your own training. It doesn't even have to be paying some instructor. YouTube is a great tool. You can learn how to do self-protection. It's just, there's simple stuff you could do just to actually take a better hold of your life. That's what, you guys, like I said, I owe you guys a debt of gratitude for that, because if he did have anything in that pocket and if I wasn't, somewhat ready, I mean, I understand you pull a knife, you're going to get cut. That's one of the things they taught us, you pull a knife in a knife fight, just be ready to be cut.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have been at home that night with the wife and the kids, and telling them to get off the computer and whatever, normal stuff,
right,
as opposed to lying on a floor, a cold mat somewhere. So I just take my story if you can, and hopefully glean something from it that'll help you guys out later in life or during the rest of your life.
Yeah, I would highly recommend, if you can't or don't want to carry a firearm, I cannot recommend pepper spray enough. Palm Peace of Mind Pepper Spray is one of our sponsors. And it is, you think about the potential threats in your environment, in your world, the odds of needing and using a firearm, although I highly recommend training with one and carrying one, but the odds of needing one and using one are so much slimmer than the possibility of something that could be solved with OC spray very quickly. We've had people on our show. We had a guy who was at church and somebody tried to break into the nursery and kidnap his kid for whom he didn't have custody. He ended that with pepper spray. We had one of our ASP employees, Soleil Rocher, on the show a couple years ago with a story of being out in public and running into a very angry homeless person who was having a mental break, someone she'd interacted with before and seen and given food and clothes to in the past through her church. And this guy was just having a bad day and decided to run at her and her kids, and she was able to deploy palm pepper spray and end that threat really before it really materialized. So that would be my big lesson out of this. One thing that Jeff demonstrated that I really love is just, you can call it situational awareness. You can call it paying attention to your surroundings. I sound like Donald Trump. Some people call it situational awareness. I call it looking around. So being aware of what's going on around you and intercepting a potential threat before it gets so close that you can't do anything about it. If you're out in a transitional space, especially, so parking garage, parking lot, anywhere like that, just pay attention. You don't have to be paranoid. Just have a look around. Don't have your head buried in your phone. Don't be playing Angry Birds or looking at Facebook or whatever out in a public space. And by the way, I know we have a lot of cops who listen. That goes double for you. I was in Phoenix not long ago, and I was at a pizza place, and there was a couple of young PD officers there waiting for their food, and they're both had their heads buried in their phone. And I wanted to go over and tap them on the shoulder and go, "Man, you're going to get killed. You're not going to see the bad guy coming." Not to get off on a rant, but there was a coffee shop near Seattle, Washington, many years ago, where 4 or 5 officers were having coffee and having a quick meeting or whatever. Guy walked in and shot and killed, I believe, 4 of them because they were so distracted and not aware of their surroundings. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. So pay attention to your surroundings, folks. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for walking up to me at the NRA meeting and introducing yourself and being willing to come tell your story. If it weren't for people like Jeff, there wouldn't be a show. Because as I like to say, no one wants to listen to me talk to myself for an hour. So Jeff, thanks again.
Thank you. And like I said, thanks to you and John. I mean, and I said in my email, you guys are ever in Indiana and just need something, give me a holler. Well, I feel like I owe you guys a debt.
We'll probably be back there at some point for an NRA meeting. I think it's there every 4 or 5 years or something like that. So definitely look you up when we come back.
I'll probably be here.
Right on.
Hopefully
Thanks.
On the top side of the grass.
Yes, sir. God willing. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.
All righty, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files, we've settled on starring Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of the Reload.com, probably the owner as well, and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. So speaking of the Weekly Reload podcast, Stephen, who was on the most recent episode of the Weekly Reload podcast?
Is this recording?
Yes.
It doesn't say it's recording.
No, it's audio only. I'm just doing the audio version.
Oh, well, I've already ruined the show now. You want to reintroduce
we should stick with this and show the people how the sausage is made.
Oh my gosh.
So this is wildly appropriate of hopefully the last ever audio only version of this show. We're going to leave that in, folks. We're going to leave it in. You're going to see the raw truth behind our genuine ineptness at our jobs. So Stephen's asking that because
this week
we're working on this new video service that Stephen recommended to me, which is really, really quite good. And so he didn't see it recording on the screen, but it's recording, I promise. So who was on your show this week?
This week we had Dave Kopel. He's a scholar at the Independence Institute, which is based in Colorado, and we had him on to talk about assault weapons bans, AR-15 bans on guns like the AR-15. Obviously, is sort of a nebulous term, but Colorado tried and failed to pass one this year, so he gave us some insight into the on-the-ground politics of that. Mm-hmm. And then he's an academic, a scholar. He writes a lot of books and briefs on gun rights, and so he gave us also the legal breakdown of how these assault weapons bans are faring throughout the country and in the federal courts.
Very good. So that actually takes us nicely into our story of the week from thereload.com. The title is, or the headline is, Supreme Court requests brief, in case against Illinois town's assault weapons ban. That's a complicated headline, if I do say so myself. But my understanding is this town, Napierville, Illinois, has passed a local like town ordinance or city ordinance banning the sale of AR-15 and similar firearms. So they're going to have to defend that before the Supreme Court. Talk to us about that, Stephen.
Yes. So there is a lawsuit against this city ban on the sale of AR-15s. It also has there's like a registration scheme coupled with that as well. But it has been challenged by the National Association for Gun Rights is the group behind this challenge. And they have failed to secure a preliminary injunction in the district court, and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals didn't grant an injunction pending appeal. So they skipped right on up to the Supreme Court and are asking for an emergency injunction against this city ordinance from the High Court itself now, and which is not an entirely uncommon thing. The Supreme Court gets a lot of these sorts of pleas through the course of a session, and the notable thing here is that Justice Amy Coney Barrett has requested that the town, Naperville, submit a brief defending its law against this challenge, which is not something that they do with every one of these briefs. Usually, most of them, they go unanswered. The court doesn't order any sort of briefing to be done, and they effectively get denied. This indicates that at least one judge on the Supreme Court wants to hear more about this case before the court decides what to do, whether or not to intervene. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I learned a new thing today, because in the article you say Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who oversees the circuit in the case. I don't think I knew. So is there a justice assigned to each district? I don't think I knew that.
Yes.
Or each circuit.
That's right. That's how it works.
I learned a thing.
Each justice is assigned to oversee certain circuits. And so it's sort of an administrative role that they have when, these sort of procedural requests are made. And it's pretty interesting to see how that works. It doesn't necessarily mean that Amy Coney Barrett is the one who wants to see a brief in this case. There's a lot about the Supreme Court's inner workings that we just don't know, right? There's a lot of it that is kept secret and that isn't disclosed to the public. But we know a number of things, right? It's not a total black box there. For instance, when they decide to take a case and hear it on the merits, that requires at least 4 justices to do. So, if you appeal, you lose at the lower court and you appeal to the Supreme Courts, you got to get 4 justices that say, yes, we want to hear this case. We want to accept this case and make a decision. Whereas on these sort of emergency procedures where in this case, you're trying to block a law before it goes into effect, and you're claiming that, your constitutional rights are being violated, and this is the only remedy for an emergency, injunction while the merits of the case are heard later on. You only need one judge to request a brief in the case, to request that, each party submits their arguments before the court decides what they're going to do. And so that's what we're seeing here. We saw this not too long ago as well in these Bruin response laws that were passed in New York that we've talked a lot about on the show. So there was an emergency request made in one of those cases, and the justices wanted to see, briefings from New York, and ultimately they decided not to intervene in that case. But that's where you saw there was a concurrence from, I believe it was Alito, that implied that they want to see the Second Circuit in that case, the New York case, move quickly on the issue, or else they might go ahead and grant an emergency injunction. Because one thing to remember here too is, like, the Supreme Court is not necessarily trying to jump into every case as soon as it possibly can.
Yeah, they can't. I mean, they don't have the time. It's just among other factors, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. They can only take so many cases. They can only grant so many emergency injunctions each year. There's only 9 people on the Supreme Court, so there's a limit to what they can do, and they like to see the lower courts develop cases before they get up to the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Right? They don't want to be the first ones to hear arguments in a case most of the time, and they also don't want to necessarily step on the toes of the lower courts if they don't have to. They don't feel like they have to do it. Right? They like to let the circuits run themselves until you get to a point where they have to intervene. Like that's why circuit splits. When people talk about the Supreme Court, circuit splits are always so important. And that's because the court is really there to resolve these instances where the lower courts aren't on the same page. Somebody has to say, well, one side is right and the other is wrong.
Right.
You can't have circuits be in conflict with each other forever.
Yeah, and the problem there is, for me anyway, I worked primarily in the 9th District, or the 9th Circuit rather, most of my career in Southern California and Arizona, and it's kind of infamous for having sort of far out rulings and decisions on things. But an agent working in California or Oregon or Washington or Arizona or other places has to know what the rules are in the 9th Circuit that are different than other places. Sometimes that's something as simple as how long do I have after I arrest someone to bring them before a magistrate judge for an initial appearance, stuff like that. But not to get too far in the weeds. But what bothers me sometimes is there's a very different culture in places in the 9th Circuit than there is in the 3rd or the 2nd. It's a different part of the country. So, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, you can't have different federal law in different parts of the country. It just doesn't work. It has to be consistent. So you write in the article over at The Reload, this move may indicate the court is getting closer to taking up a case against so-called assault weapons bans after it handed down the new test case for guns, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. So do we think they are trying to work to a point where they can settle the idea once and for all of cities and states trying to ban a particular kind of gun? Is it something you think they're trying to get to?
I think so. This is another indicator that they may be closer to intervening in one of these assault weapons ban cases. You already had an indicator after Bruen where, the court, after it decided that case and it handed down this new test for how to decide other gun cases going forward, it took a number of cases and did what's commonly referred to as GBR them, which means they granted them, they vacated the lower court's ruling, and then they remanded them back down to the lower court to redo the case in light of their new test. And one of those cases was the Maryland assault weapons ban case in the 4th Circuit, where the 4th Circuit had upheld Maryland's assault weapons ban. And so the court was saying, all right, try this one again, but do it under our new standard. It doesn't necessarily mean that they think the assault weapons bans are unconstitutional, but I think it's a decent indicator that they think that. Certainly you have probably at least 4 justices, Thomas, Alito, Barrett and Kavanaugh, who've all come out, from what I recall, on this issue already. And, it'll be interesting to see if and when they do take up a case like this. I mean, this Illinois case is pretty distinct because, you're dealing with an emergency injunction instead of a regular appeal. So even if they do issue the emergency injunction, it technically wouldn't be a ruling on the merits necessarily. It would just be a ruling that the law should be blocked until you get to the merits, until you get to a merits ruling by one of these lower courts. But, even it's like a lot of times in preliminary injunction cases, right, where the courts always say it's likely that this law is unconstitutional. And really, in practice, that means this law is unconstitutional.
Right.
Like, I try to be careful about the language of it, because technically, when, for instance, this Illinois had passed a statewide ban in the years after this city ban had gone into law, and that was just preliminarily enjoined last Friday. And again, in that ruling, it technically is not a ruling on the merits. It's a ruling that this law can't be enforced while we go through the rest of this court proceeding. But the standard for issuing a preliminary injunction is very high, and it includes the idea that you are likely to win when they get to the merits stage. So it's one of these legal nuances where it's like, technically, they're not ruling that the law is unconstitutional. They're just ruling that it's very likely to be unconstitutional once they get through the full case. So that's a similar idea here, where the court could issue an emergency injunction blocking enforcement of this city ban. And technically, it wouldn't be saying that the law is unconstitutional, but it would be saying effectively that it is. So, that's where you have to sort of remember how the court system actually works, and where you get these indicators where they're not technically saying that Maryland's assault weapons ban is unconstitutional and that the decision upholding it was wrong when they granted, vacated, and remanded that case. But it's hard to read that as them saying it's not unconstitutional, or that they don't have a significant problem with it. At the very, very best for Maryland, they're saying we want to see how this law holds up under our new standard.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, so that combined with this interest in at least hearing out both sides of this particular case in relatively early stages of it, you put those indicators together, you're kind of trying to read tea leaves or read entrails, right? But that's where the direction it takes me in, is that the court is very interested in addressing this issue at some point.
So I guess the next headline over at the Reload could be Supreme Court, and then open quotes. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, close quote. So that needs to be.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that needs to be over there at some point. Speaking of the Reload, folks, I don't know if you've heard, but Mr. Gutowski has his very own website and podcast, and it's at thereload.com. I highly recommend you go over there and check it out. It's all good stuff. It is the stories you're just not getting other places. He is breaking stories with some frequency. He has a lot of people in powerful places that give him information you don't get other places, and it's sane and it's sober. That I don't want to reinforce that. That's the reason I love Steven and I love his website, because it is sane, sober, down the middle, doesn't take sides, doesn't get unnecessarily political. He just reports the facts and gives you the stories you're not going to hear anywhere else. So please go over to thereload.com and carefully consider giving him a couple of your dollars to help continue his important work. Steven, as always, I will see you next week, and you, sir, have the last word.
Absolutely.